hygiene practices. Again, this can be more applicable to industry than it is to emergency response, but we still need to be able to find it. Continue reading through. Other hygienic and work practices. And he gives some recommendations for skin contact. And it gives recommendation for how you should address that. This is the information that we want in hygiene practices. So it's talking about, if you do come in contact with this, for skin contact, list these things: mild soap and water, hand cleaners, and so forth. Don't editorialize, don't get creative, just list the criteria that are there. Again, it doesn't have to be verbatim copying those sentences over, but get the bulk of that information moved over. Protective measures, same thing. We're looking for their recommendation. We're not making anything up. We're not adding anything that's not listed here, but we're going to look for how best to protect ourselves. These last few sections are kind of getting into the weeds where you may have to do a little reading, you may have to do a little scanning, and that's okay. Nobody's expecting you to be an expert on MSDS because truly nobody is. There is no industry standard. There's no one way to develop these. It'd be nice if there was, but there's not. So we know that you're going to be flipping around through the packet looking for this. That's the point of the exercise, your ability to navigate the MSDS and find the information we care about. So here in Section 8, I've found exposure controls and personal protection. We get a long explanation. I would scan through and find the biggest items in here. We're looking for means of protecting ourselves. So it talks about respirators. It'll talk about skin protection, air purifying respirator, eye protection, avoid all skin contact, wearing gloves, aprons, boots, facial protection. These are the types of items we want to transfer over. You'll see that it's just 2 lines. They're not looking for us to transfer paragraphs over. They just want us to list what are some of those protective measures. Applicable control measures. This will be some of the same information. Here we see exposure controls are actually consolidated with personal protection in this particular SDS. That may not always be the case, but in this one it is. So don't overthink it. Don't overanalyze. Use what's given in the MSDS. So exposure controls, we're going to move in here. We're going to simply go through and look for anything applying to how to control exposure. A lot of those will overlap with personal protection on this particular one, like I said, because they are sharing the same section. PPE. This part will get a little bit repetitive, but we've talked about wearing goggles, wearing eye protection. These are more industry-based things. It can be helpful to look a little bit further, because we can look at this from the emergency response side and say, what if it's on fire? What if we're in the firefighting role? We've got over here special firefighting procedures. It is a flammability hazard, so we know that we're going to be wearing our structural firefighting gear, SCBA. But always look for these key markers like special firefighting procedures specific to PPE. I always give it one more scan after finishing a section just to make sure there's not anything obvious that I missed. If it's not there, I'm not going to add it. So we've got some industry recommendations. So respiratory protection, obviously, eye protection, gloves, avoiding skin contact, all of those things that were listed already in this personal protection section. But then never hurts to also add those firefighting measures. Lastly, we move on to emergency and first aid procedures. This will always be listed on an MSDS. It's a requirement because we need to know what to do if we show up and other people have been exposed or if we, as responders, are exposed. So it's listed right here, nice and simple, emergency and first aid. Inhalation hazards. What do we do if? Eye contact, skin contact, ingestion. So those same routes of entry listed again, but this is taking it one step further. What do we do as first aid measures? A lot of times it is just flushing with copious amounts of water. You'll see that listed often. Sometimes it is just the best we can do is remove contaminated clothing. This is that emergency decon piece that you'll see again. Again, one more scan of the content. I make sure that I've satisfied everything that looks like emergency and first aid procedures. This one's made nice and easy because it's its own section. I transfer over the data applicable. I always give it one more look, top to bottom. Did I grab all this content? Are there any physical and chemical characteristics that maybe weren't listed initially that I found in other areas? Give it one more scan through the whole data sheet just to make sure I didn't leave out any pertinent information. Confident that I'm going to get that 18 of 23 items. If you just take your time, use a methodical process for reading this MSDS, if you make yourself familiar before you even show up for test day, there's no reason you won't get the 23 out of 23 and pass this very easily. So that's your overview of Hazmat Ops worksheet and JPR number 2. And you'll see that all of those measures correspond from the worksheet over to the JPR.